Hello and welcome to this webinar entitled Clarifying Common GDPR Myths and Misconceptions with me, Keith Markham. As always, let's begin by having a look at the agenda for this session today, which is a packed agenda full of all sorts of interesting and exciting things. So we're going to begin by reminding ourselves what the applicable rules are. So often there can be a misconception about which version of the GDPR does apply to us. Obviously, we will be seeing shortly that we have the UK GDPR, which we are predominantly bothered about in this session today. But of course, we also have the EU GDPR, and we'll be talking fairly shortly about what the distinctions are between the two, and also when one will apply and perhaps not the other. So that's the first sort of common misconception we're going to look at. And then we're going to look at the issue of lawful bases. Now, essentially, lawful basis is just a justification for collecting somebody's personal data and for using it in various ways. There are a variety of possible lawful bases, which include things like consent and legitimate interest. Often there can be some confusion about which lawful bases we have to use. So we're going to look at the possible lawful bases. We will focus our attention in on consent and legitimate interest, and then we'll apply that through the prism of the world of direct marketing, because there's often a lot of confusion about which lawful basis I must rely upon in order to carry out direct marketing, and we'll look at the various considerations there. Then we'll look at international data transfers. Thankfully, the world of international data transfers has largely calmed down now, following a few years of fairly significant change. So we will be talking about essentially the sort of methodologies that can be used to transfer data to a third country, as we put it. And we'll talk particularly about the concepts of the International Data Transfer Agreement and also the EU standard contractual clauses, and think about which one we might want to use. We'll then go on to talk about personal data breaches. Now, on other occasions, I've recorded a whole hour on this topic. In this session, we're looking at sort of common misconceptions, as we know. So we're going to be talking about, do I need to report every breach? Do I need to report breaches immediately? Do I need to record breaches? We'll look at some of the key issues around that, just to give you a flavour of the major considerations there. Then we'll go on to look at examples of UK GDPR enforcement. So we'll look at one or two recent scenarios with regard to that, predominantly to do with security breaches, hence why it follows on from personal data breaches there. Then we'll look at the issue of compensation. Again, often there can be myths and misconceptions about entitlement to claim compensation, what can be claimed for, in what context. We will look at a couple of leading cases with regard to that. And then finally, we will come to the proposed changes to the legislation. So the Data Use and Access Bill essentially is likely to be enforced by the end of 2025. We will look at the current proposals with regard to that in terms of changes to the UK GDPR and also to other relevant GDPR and data protection related legislation. Right, let's begin then with the first sort of myth or misconception, which is which set of rules actually applies to me.